Yes.
Alrighty, so as normal, we should start with the less wrong posts. And today we had making history available and what was the last one? Stranger than history. I think we actually forgot to announce this in last week's episode, so hopefully this isn't catching anyone too much by surprise. But let's get into making history available. Uh, Steven, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is where he introduces the concept or just where he mentions it again, but this is it, he opens with the fallacy of generalization from fictional evidence, which is one of my favorites. It's always fun to kind of point these out whenever they happen in the wild, like just with conversations with friends or something. And once you're aware that people are actually doing this, I think you might notice that it happens surprisingly often. I don't hear a lot of things involving Terminator necessarily, but which is what he brings up because that's, especially in 2007 was the main focal point for AI in movies. Um, it's yeah, I mean, I'm really bad at summarizing. We can just
It's
uh,
amazing how much more AI there has been in movies over the past, I guess, 13 years now. Like
yeah.
Terminator at the time was my go-to example of what AI is, and now it's like not even in the top five, I don't think.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot more mainstream, especially more not necessarily realistic, but more nuanced takes on the idea in fiction, especially. But when he talks about the and it's not the point of the post necessarily, but the logical fallacy of generalization from fictional evidence. A lot of what people do is that they hear a story and they use that as like how they get a handle on a concept, and then that just kind of stays with them, even if the like fictional example doesn't apply in the real world.
Yeah. I love the term too, generalization from fictional evidence, and
Yeah,
I think this is the first time it shows up in the sequences. I'm not actually sure because it's just become so ingrained in my vocabulary now. I don't know when I first saw it.
Yeah, same. I can't let this pass without just pointing out how much better I think a lot of uh, cinema, especially, does AI. Like, or cinema or TV or whatever. It's not really spoilery. There's AI stuff involved in the towards the end of the TV series Silicon Valley, which is a delightful comedy series about computer nerds trying to start a business, and uh, like it was perfect. I think that it did really really well. I even paused at a certain part to explain to my wife, like just to throw jargon at her, because I was like, oh my god, they're hinting at this thing. If you read Nick Bostrom's book, this would be the thing they're talking about.
Hmm.
And I think they hit it right on the head. So yeah, things have gotten at least more. There's more variety to point to, but yeah, this post isn't just about introducing that concept. It talks about, as the title might suggest, like because some of us who are aware of the fallacy of generalizing from fictional evidence, like we have a propensity to not consider historical evidence as real evidence. Um, and I think that, and he has this like line in there about how, like, what was it? Oh, in our ancestral environment, there were no movies. What you saw with your own eyes was true. Is it any wonder that fictions we see in lifelike moving pictures have too great an impact on us? Conversely, things that really happened, we encounter as ink on paper, and they happened, but we never saw them happen. We don't remember them happening to us. And so, like, I have memories from, watching movies or playing video games, especially where it kind of feels more like I'm doing these things. And none of that's real, but it's more readily available to my, like, did this happen bucket in my brain than stuff that I read on a page or heard someone talk about in a class, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I still have like some visceral memories of playing Soma and the experience at the end of that game, and it never actually happened to me, right? But it still like kind of emotionally feels like it did that I went through that journey.
yeah,
And that's, to be clear, this isn't to say that you can't take stuff from fiction. I think it'd be a complete misnomer to pretend that A, that's what this is saying, or B, that that's true.
Yeah,
Like you can even draw real life lessons from fiction. But the point is that you should be more inclined than we typically are to take real life lessons from things that really happened in our Earth's real history.
And he did say at one point that one of the reasons he wrote Methods of Rationality, well, Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, was because he wanted to find some way to give the experience of being rational and making these discoveries, and that wasn't just ink on paper like the sequences were, that were more like a memory and experience that people remember emotionally. And I think he did a pretty good job. But I'm biased.
Yeah, it's a lot of that post, he goes into like trying to get that feeling of having been there from history. Like when you read about history, trying to actually put yourself in the shoes of, you know, the people who can seem very abstract and who I guess we can misunderstand fairly easily.
Yeah. He said that like it happened right after, in the last episode we talked about his mysterious answer he gave to a mysterious question, and how if he had lived through vitalism he would have recognized that was what was happening. And he said he reiterates that here, that he'd only read about that in books, but had it actually happened to him, if he had experienced it in the past and lived through those scientific revolutions, he would not have made that same mistake. And so now, this next part, like, I found a really interesting insight into his mind, because he has this whole thing where he says he should try to approximate the thoughts of an Eliezer who had lived through history. He should think as if everything he read in history books has actually happened to him. He says, why should I remember the Wright brothers' first flight? I was not there. But as a rationalist, could I dare to not remember when the event actually happened? I had to overcome the false amnesia of being born at a particular time. And he goes on to describe how he starts trying to form these memories that never actually happened to him, and it's really an interesting read.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to kind of concur that it's interesting and fun, and I mean, all these are short. Everyone should just be reading these too.
Yeah. I want to go ahead and pull out two more things near the bottom that he says he came to realize as he tried to picture himself actually living through all these historical events. He says, the modern world became fragile to my eyes. It was not the first modern world. He mentions this right after he describes living in a stable Roman Empire and then seeing it crumble and overrun by barbarians. So many mistakes made over and over and over again because I did not remember making them in every era I never lived. And to think, people sometimes wonder if overcoming bias is important. And then he admonishes everyone to remember things that they didn't actually live through. He says, remember how you had always thought that slavery was right and proper, and then you changed your mind. Don't imagine how you could have predicted the change, for that is amnesia. Remember that, in fact, you did not guess. Remember how, century after century, the world changed in ways you did not guess. Maybe then you will be less shocked by what happens next. So.
Yeah, I like it. And that transitions perfectly smoothly into Stranger Than History,
Yes.
which was the second post. And this is the one that, like, before we started recording, I'd mentioned that, like, if you knew nothing else about Eliezer Yudkowsky, I think you could at least get that he's a creative guy with a funny streak just by reading, like, the first 3 bullet points on this post. And so I'm going to go ahead and just read all 3 of them because I can't not. So it opens by saying, suppose I told you that I knew for a fact that the following statements were true. 1. If you paint yourself a certain exact color between blue and green, it will reverse the force of gravity on you and cause you to fall upward. 2. In the future, the sky will be filled by billions of floating black spheres. Each sphere will be larger than all the zeppelins that have ever existed put together. If you offer a sphere money, it will lower a male prostitute out of the sky on a bungee cord. 3. Your grandchildren will think it's not just foolish, but evil to put thieves in jail instead of just spanking them. You'd think that's crazy, right?
And I like that the next 3 that he puts out to contrast these, because like you can see the one-to-one correlation between them. It says, now suppose it were the year 1901 and you had to choose between believing those statements I have just offered and believing statements like the following. 1. There's an absolute speed limit on how fast 2 objects can seem to be traveling relative to each other, which is exactly the speed of light in miles per hour. If you hop on board a train going almost this fast and fire a gun out the window, the fundamental units of length change around. So it looks to you like the bullet's speeding ahead of you, but other people see something different. Oh, and time changes around too. which is his correlation to the painting yourself an exact color will reverse gravity. It says, in the future, there will be a super-connected global network of billions of adding machines, each one which has more power than all the pre-1901 adding machines put together. One of the primary uses of this network will be to transport moving pictures of lesbian sex by pretending they are made out of numbers. Which, I want to pause real quick to say, remember in 2007 when the primary form of porn was lesbian sex? Boy, were we naive. And then finally, your grandchildren will think that it is not just foolish, but evil to say that someone should not be president of the United States because she is black. And I think this does like Steven said, it very well ties into the previous post about pointing out just how weird the future can be and how hard it is to predict what's going to be happening because you haven't lived through all these sort of crazy revolutionary statements in the past, so you aren't prepared for a world that's going to change in such drastic ways. Like, I mean, if you were to compare any two of those statements, it's hard to say which one is more ridiculous.
Oh yeah, and I mean then you just generate like actual future guesses that seem probable and they sound equally insane, which is like the hidden inference from this, right? In the future, people will be able to switch bodies depending on what they want to feel like looking like that day, and at a whim they can jump in and out of a matrix-like simulation. That's something that I can see actually happening in the future, but that sounds just as insane as painting myself green and flying, right?
I've always kind of assumed, to get into slightly more fraught territory here, that in Three Worlds Collide, the fiction he wrote, there's this one chapter where the protagonist mentioned that rape is legal now in the future. And there's a lot of implications in my mind in the story that what he's referring to as rape is different from what we think of as rape. But without getting into all that, I thought of this post the first time I read that, and I was like, maybe he's doing this thing where he's just trying to make us understand how weirdly bizarre the future might be, that we can read that and like we are all shocked and appalled, but perhaps in the future that could actually be the truth, just the same way that we people 100 years from now, 100 years in the past, would think that it is shocking to say that it is evil that someone shouldn't be president if they're black.
Yeah, I wonder, like, I can't remember because I wasn't there, so I should remember, even though I wasn't because of amnesia. If he invented the term weirdtopia, or if that was a TV trope saying or some third source. But I think that's what he was going for there. Like, he wanted to stress that, look, if the future utopia is exactly like you think it would be, you're probably missing something. A future utopia probably won't be just like you think it would be, because the odds of you being exactly right on everything are low.
Yeah, your future shouldn't just be an extrapolation of the present based on like trend lines that you can see coming.
Mm-hmm. So that's never what the future's actually going to be like.
Yeah, I think Charles Stross said that the future is like 90% totally mundane, normal stuff, and like 9% just extrapolation of trends, and then like 1% total weird bug fuck stuff that you cannot predict whatsoever. And that's kind of his approach to world building for the future is like, if you're writing something that's like 20 years in the future, there needs to be that element of just strange things that aren't not necessarily that aren't predictable, but that seem to people as though they came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I kind of feel like it's pointless to try to write a true future, in part because, it is so unpredictable, but also because we aren't writing for future audiences. Like, if you go back and read science fiction of the past, it's pretty obvious that it's like written for the audience of the time and how they think what is happening right now is going to affect the future. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, I think that's kind of legitimately the place of science fiction, to be like, what is the future that we are careening towards if other things don't change? And let's think about that for a while, despite the fact that we know well and very well that something crazy and drastic is going to change. But what can you do about that?
Yeah.
It's not like your audience is people of the future. They cannot buy your book.
Yeah. I think in some sense, the partly science fiction authors ruminate on it a lot, just because that's what they enjoy doing.
Yeah.
They like making their predictions and stuff. It's a fun thing to do, but it's also partly just to give a bit of to like invest a bit of the zeitgeist into your work, and then also to add a little bit of realism by taking like current trends and extrapolating them out and trying to create a world that people will understand. But that kind of leaves you out on the weird, the like necessarily weird stuff that makes no sense to people from like 30 years ago.
I don't know. I could go on in science fiction at length because, man, I love that topic. But we don't have time for all that today. Is there anything more that either of you guys had about these two posts?
I think I'm good. I think talking about science fiction transitions semi-smoothly into talking about the stranger than fiction stuff that we're talking about here. Although that just sounded better than it actually ties in. So, stranger than real, maybe. Not quite. Whatever.
Before we get to that, I hate to fuck up your transition, or segue rather. Sorry,
No,
but we
please,
should mention
it was lost from the start.
We should mention the posts for next episode.
Of course.
Next episode, we will be reading and talking about Explain, Worship, Ignore, and Science as Curiosity Stopper.
Perfect.